Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I'm your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. Welcome to round two of the playoffs. If you won and are moving on, congratulations. If you did not and you're playing in the consolation bracket, maybe you're playing for some money in a money league or something, or you just want to keep up with fantasy football so you know what happened at the end of the season after you were eliminated. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here still. And if you advanced, congratulations again. That will segue us into our congratulate or commiserate segment. So, in my three leagues, I am in the semifinals in all three leagues. The 12 team Superflex League, I had the bye this past week. I was the two seed. I had the most amount of points scored over the course of the season. I was feeling good. It's a two quarterback league. It's a super flex. So I had four starting quarterbacks going into the week. I had Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford, Taysom Hill, and Alex Smith. Drew Brees might be coming back, so Taysom Hill might be out. Alex Smith and Matthew Stafford both got hurt this past week, so they are both questionable. It's looking like I might be down to one starting quarterback after being at four. Hopefully, I can cobble a team together. I'm really banking on Josh Allen and Derrick Henry and AJ Brown, my studs to kind of carry the way. And if I have to end up playing Gardner Minshew or something, hopefully the rest of my team, like I said, I was the high point scorer. So hopefully the rest of my team can kind of make up for that and get me into the championship round. In my 10 team Reality Sports Online League, I was able to advance. I was the highest scorer in the semifinal round. So that I felt good about that. I did leave a lot of points on the bench because I have Cam Akers and Kareem Hunt were both on my bench. I We will talk about Cam Akers a little bit later. I don't know if I can work him in my lineup or not. I'm really loaded at running back. I am hurting a little bit at wide receiver, so I wish I could play like five running backs and one wide receiver, but it's three running backs, three wide receivers in the starting lineup. So I'll have some choices to make there, but I was able to win. Just solid weeks all around from everyone. David Montgomery was good. Kirk Cousins and Ryan Tannehill were serviceable. Stephon Diggs is a stud. So yeah, I was able to advance there. And then my 10 team ESPN Standard League, it's the league that I barely slipped into the playoffs. I was the sixth seed coming out against the three seed, and I was able to win on the back of Lamar Jackson last night and Mark Andrews. I was down by 20 points. I had Lamar, Mark Andrews, and the Ravens defense, all of them. So I just needed them to combine for over 20 points. Um, Luckily, Lamar and Mark Andrews came through for me. Despite the Ravens defense scoring -6, I was still able to win and advance. So I am in the semifinals in all of my leagues rather. So super pumped about that. Yeah, it should be a fun round two. I don't think I've made it to the semifinals in all of my leagues in the same year before. So this is a first, and this should be fun. Um, Adam wrote in on Twitter. He was a fellow Ravens defense owner. He wrote in that he lost his matchup by two after going into the Monday night game with a 4-point lead because he left the Baltimore defense in when his opponent had nobody left. That is a tough one to take, and it is a good lesson for everyone. Maybe you do this in the regular season if you need the points tiebreaker, you're trying to score as many points as possible. But in the playoffs, you were up by four, your opponent had nobody left, and you have a defense left or a kicker, or even anybody really. You don't want to risk getting those negative points and losing. So you just pull them out of your lineup, leave the spot empty, and take the win. It sounds like that was Adam's plan, and he just didn't follow through with it. Adam, I am sorry. That is a tough pill to swallow and a tough loss for sure. Hopefully, you've learned and you won't make that mistake in the future. So we'll move on to high flying or nose diving. I'm going to talk about the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. I'm going to highlight someone who is high flying after this past week, who is looked good this past weekend, and then someone at the position who's nose diving, someone who didn't look that great and who I'm concerned about going forward. So my high flying quarterback is Mitch Trubisky. He's thrown for 3 touchdowns in 2 out of the last 3 games, and he hasn't looked near as bad as he did to start the season. I've talked about David Montgomery's great playoff schedule. Well, Trubisky also benefits from that, and they get to play Minnesota this coming week and then Jacksonville in week 16. That is a really good stretch, and for someone who's throwing as many touchdowns as Trubisky, he has Allen Robinson to throw to. I think he is a solid option, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. I think he's a very viable start. And if you're in a single quarterback league, if you're in a pinch, someone goes down with COVID, or you've been streaming all year, I think Trubisky is actually a decent option. So surprising there, honestly. Trubisky's back. He looked really bad to start the season. He got benched. Nick Foles got hurt, and now Trubisky is back. I saw a crazy stat also that since coming into the league, Mitch Trubisky has a better win percentage than Deshaun Watson, which is crazy. It probably just speaks to how poorly run the Houston Texans have been. But both were Pro Bowl quarterbacks, and Trubisky hasn't looked that bad. He has not looked that bad. 3 touchdowns in 2 of the last 3 games. Like I said, that's good, that's solid, and that's what you want out of your streamer. My nose diving quarterback is Matthew Stafford. So I mentioned him because he is one of my quarterbacks in my Superflex league, and he is injured, and he hasn't been that good on the season. He's only scored over 20 points 4 times in 13 games played this year. And week 13's 28-point explosion against the Bears did not carry forward into this past week against Green Bay. It looks like Galladay might sit the rest of the year. I don't see why they would activate Galladay. I think he's a free agent too, so he probably doesn't want to be activated and risk getting hurt. And now Stafford's dealing with a rib injury. The X-rays did come back negative, so that's a positive sign. And Stafford's a really tough guy. He usually plays through injuries, but there's only a few games left in the season. And there's not really anything left to play for the Lions. So Stafford dealing with this rib injury, he did leave, and Chase Daniels came in and played the fourth quarter against the Packers. If Stafford is out, obviously this downgrades Hawkinson, it downgrades Marvin Jones, DeAndre Swift. Really, the whole offense takes a step back if Stafford is out. And Tennessee is on tap, so it's a great matchup coming up. But with Stafford being banged up, no Galladay, the Lions not having any motivation to play really, I would try to find a better option than Matthew Stafford. I know I might have to start him in my Superflex league. But even in 2 quarterback leagues, I would try to find someone else. If Taysom Hill is still the quarterback for the Saints this week, I'm probably going to play Taysom Hill. If Taysom Hill is the backup and Drew Brees is back, I'll go Stafford over Alex Smith if both of them are healthy. But I really hope you have better options than Matthew Stafford. My high-flying running back is Cam Akers. So he played all the way back in the Thursday night game, and he was dominant, if you do not recall. He had 29 carries, and it looks like he's finally taken over the Rams' backfield just in time for the fantasy playoffs. If you were brave enough to rely on him in round 1, then kudos. I did not have the stomach to do that based on how inconsistent the Rams' backfield has been all season. Yes, he was the lead back in week 12, but 1 week was not enough for me to go on, especially in round 1 of the playoffs. It'll take a lot less courage to roll him out there in round 2, now after seeing him dominate the backfield touches last week, and they get to play the Jets. Akers is probably a low-end running back 1 this week, and he should be great for your semifinals matchups. I do not know if I can fit Cam Akers into my own lineup. Like I said, I am stacked at running back. I have David Montgomery, James Robinson, and Kenyon Drake. That's who I started last week. I also have Kareem Hunt on the bench with Cam Akers. So thinking through it, James Robinson is a top 5 running back. With Gardner Minshew back, he should be more involved in the passing game than he has been recently, just like he was when Gardner was the starter. So it's really hard for me to bench a top 5 fantasy running back who's done it all year long. So James Robinson's in. David Montgomery's been really good recently. His matchup is really good, and he's the only show in town. Like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Tariq Cohen went down, and David Montgomery got the passing work, like you would hope. So with David Montgomery being a full workhorse and them not having anybody else, David Montgomery is probably in because of the good matchups. And then Kenyon Drake, he got 23 carries this past week, caught a couple passes, he got another touchdown. I think his workload is more secure than Cam Akers, and I think he has more touchdown upside than Cam Akers. Even in the matchup with the Jets, I just don't see how I don't stick with those three guys, which leaves Cam Akers on my bench, sadly. But if you're not in a situation where you are stacked at running back, I totally see Cam Akers as a starter. He's definitely a running back two, if nothing else. Like I said, he'll probably end up being a low end running back one in my models, just like he was last week. So if you're not stacked at running back, Cam Akers is a great option for you. My nose diving running back is Josh Jacobs. So he is on two of my rosters. He's on my 10 team standard ESPN league, and he's on my 12 team Superflex league. His inconsistency has been maddening this year, despite him being running back 6 overall in the season. He was my first round pick in my 10 team standard ESPN league, and he was the second highest paid player in my 12 team Superflex draft. It was an auction draft, so Derrick Henry was my highest paid, and then Josh Jacobs. But he was limited to just 29 snaps out of about 65 this past week against the Colts. He's on a short week for the Thursday night game. They play the Chargers. He's dealing with an ankle injury, and he doesn't look to be the dominant workhorse back that we thought. We were hoping that coming into the season he would get all this passing work. That has not panned out, and now he's dealing with an ankle injury. He's splitting time with Devontae Booker. I'm playing him this week. He's probably still a running back two, but he seems to be really touchdown reliant. If he doesn't get a touchdown this week, you'll probably end up with the 6 to 7 points that he got last week and kind of be disappointed. My high flying wide receiver is T.Y. Hilton. I mentioned him as a solid option on the waiver show last week, but I did not expect the magic to continue to this extent. He was 5 for 86 and 2 touchdowns this past week. That's after going 8 for 110 and 1 touchdown the week before that. And oh yeah, he had 4 for 81 and a touchdown 2 weeks ago. So this is 3 weeks in a row that T.Y. Hilton has been very fantasy relevant. The dude is on fire, and he gets to play Houston again this week. So he has a fantastic matchup coming up. He's coming off 3 straight weeks of fantasy consistency, and I'm on board with T.Y. Hilton. I would definitely start him in all leagues that I have him. If he's still available in your league, I think you can pick him up and play him right away. I assume he has been picked up, though, because he has been good for multiple weeks in a row now. But if he's still there, pick him up. Play him in your semifinal matchups. My nose diving wide receiver is Tyler Lockett. He's been living on the high of that 40-point game for a while now. Since that huge game in week 7, Lockett has just 1 touchdown catch, and that one game where he had the touchdown is the only game in double-digit fantasy points since that week 40 game. He's been a detriment to your fantasy team for the entire second half of the season, and if you have not done so already, I think it's way past time to bench him, especially with Washington and the Rams coming up as their next 2 matchups. Those are 2 tough defenses, and Lockett's not delivering even in the good matchups like this past week against the Jets. If you've been riding him this long and he's stayed in your lineup and you're still somehow in the fantasy playoffs, I would bench Tyler Lockett. It's time to give up and move on to better options. My high-flying tight end, I just want to highlight Travis Kelce this week. He currently leads the NFL in receiving yards and is on pace to smash the all-time tight end receiving yards record. He's been the top tight end for like 5 straight years now. So why would that change? He's fully worth a first-round pick next year, especially in 10-team leagues where a difference maker at tight end is such a benefit to your lineup, where everyone has pretty good running backs and wide receivers. If you get one of those 1 or 2 difference makers at tight end in a 10-team league, you are set. And Travis Kelce is more than that even. He's leading all players in receiving yards in the NFL, more than Tyreek Hill, who's on his team, more than Devontae Adams, more than all those wide receivers. Travis Kelce is leading the way. So he's just a stud, and I wouldn't hesitate to draft him in the first round next year. I did draft him in the first round of my 10-team league last year, and I ended up being the high point scorer in that league and winning the division. I ended up getting knocked out in the semis and getting 3rd place in the league, but that doesn't really take away from the fact that drafting Travis Kelce in the first round helped me score the most points in the league, get that first round bye, and win the division. And he's doing that again this year. And I don't think that you should hesitate on pulling the trigger on drafting him next year in the first round. So I just wanted to highlight him here, that he is my high flying tight end, because he's more than just a tight end. He's basically just two tight ends in one spot. He's a wide receiver in your tight end spot. He's the best wide receiver right now in the league. So yes, Travis Kelce, great season. Hopefully you can grab him next year if you did not this year. My nose diving tight end. There's so many names to choose from, but let's go with Dallas Goedert. Jalen Hurts came in and he lit the world on fire at quarterback. He beat the vaunted New Orleans Saints defense. He came in his first start and he took them down. Unfortunately, he did that on the ground more so than through the air. Goddard did lead the team with 6 targets, but he only finished with 4 catches for 43 yards, which was 3 yards behind Jalen Reagor, who was the leading receiver in yards. Goddard was the leading receiver in catches with 4. I'm not saying it can't get better with Hurts, but Wentz was going to Goddard with regular, predictable consistency, and I'm not sure you can bank on that with Goddard. I'm not sure you can even count on him being a tight end 1 now with Hurts under center. So be cautious. You might not have a better option. If you're looking at the waiver wire, there's probably not a better option than Goddard. He's my tight end in my 12-team Superflex league. And looking at the waiver wire, it's going to be either Goddard or my top targeted tight end, who we will talk about shortly. But I'm probably going to end up sticking with Goddard just because his targets were still there. I just don't think it's going to be as good as it was with Wentz, despite Hurts being a much better quarterback for the team. With that, we will move into straight fire from the waiver wire. I have a note here that says spend all the fab you can if you need a play this week. Week 15 is not the time to save fab. Even if you save $1 or $2 for the championship round next week, spend big if you need to start this week. So if you need any of these guys, if you have holes in your lineup due to injuries, or maybe you want some more depth for surprise COVID situations, spend up if you want a player. Don't hold your fab to championship week. You need to win now. If you lose, you're out. So my top target at running back this week is Cam Akers. I talked about him above, and all of that holds true now. He is the definition of a plug and play this week. He is 66% owned in ESPN leagues, but if he's out there, go get him and start him. I have him as my top target, even though he's owned pretty wide. Like, he's owned in a majority of leagues. 66% is pretty high, but the other running backs this week do not excite me. I don't think any of these guys that I'm about to mention, these other running backs, are necessarily good starts this week. I think they're just depth pieces, and maybe if someone gets hurt, they can be, or someone goes on COVID and they're propelled into more of a feature back role, they could be good. But otherwise, Cam Akers is my only running back that I would pick up from the waivers and start this week. So other running backs to consider: Gus Edwards, he's a solid option. He's on a great rushing team, and he's had back-to-back and he has back-to-back good matchups coming up to close the year. He scored twice last night, and he went over 100 rushing yards 2 weeks ago, and then he scored again 3 weeks ago. The only problem here is his touches are limited. He's only had like 7 to 9 carries the last 3 games, so he's doing all of that on very limited work, and you can maybe rely on that because the Ravens are such a good rushing team. But with such limited work, I would not start Gus Edwards despite the good matchup. Jeff Wilson Jr., he seems to have a good amount of work in the San Francisco timeshare, and he might even get more if Raheem Mostert continues dealing with injury. I know Mostert was getting an MRI on Monday. I think his x-rays or something came back negative, so I don't think, and Mostert did come back into the game after leaving for a while on Sunday, so I don't know that Mostert is necessarily going to miss the game, but he might be more limited. And Jeff Wilson Jr. seems to be getting a good amount of goal line work either way. Even with Mostert healthy before he went out, Wilson was the guy that got the goal line touchdown in the first quarter, so he could do worse than picking him up. And if Mostert misses, he's definitely a good play. Nyheim Hines continues to be involved. He has roughly about 5 to 10 rushing attempts and a handful of catches per game, so that keeps him in play, especially against Houston this week, who is awful. Ito Smith played more than Todd Gurley last week, so hopefully you heeded my warning last week when I said stay away from Todd Gurley and don't play him in your fantasy playoffs. He's obviously not right. His knee is obviously injured, and he was so touchdown reliant even before he was hampered by this knee injury. Yeah, Ito Smith looks to be leading the way there. I probably wouldn't play Ito Smith either way. Unless Todd Gurley is ruled out, then Ito Smith becomes a decent flyer. My top wide receiver to grab is Nelson Aguilar. If you need a grab and play wide receiver, Aguilar is my pick this week. He's owned in just 27% of ESPN leagues, so he should be widely available in most of your leagues. He had 9 targets this past week. He caught 5 of them for 100 yards and a touchdown. Aguilar is clearly Carr's most trusted receiving option outside of Darren Waller, and Carr's been good this year besides a couple of down games. The Raiders do have a Thursday night game against the Chargers. Their defense is not scary. They've been super inconsistent this year after a couple key injuries. So the matchup is fine. So streaming Aguilar this week is a decent option. If I had to pick a wide receiver on the waivers that's widely available to start this week, Aguilar would be my pick. Other wide receivers to consider: Tim Patrick, he scored again this past week. He's still widely available. Yeah, I don't trust Drew Lock very much. Rashard Higgins looked like the wide receiver to own in Cleveland last night. He caught another touchdown, went for almost 70 yards. Lynn Bowden Jr., he has running back and wide receiver eligibility. He's on the Dolphins. And with a slew of Dolphins injuries, he should continue to remain involved after leading them in targets, receptions, and receiving yards this past week. So monitor the injuries in Miami. If multiple people are about to miss, Lynn Bowden Jr. becomes a decent flex. Gabriel Davis, he just keeps catching touchdowns from Josh Allen. So if you want a touchdown upside player from the waiver wire, Davis is your guy. And finally, Kendrick Bourne, he could be a decent pickup if Debo is going to miss for the 49ers again this week. Debo left on the first play from scrimmage with a hamstring injury. I played Debo in my 10-team reality sports league, and I was able to win even with the 0.9 points he got me. So that's why I spread a little thin at wide receiver now. Chase Claypool's going back in the lineup because I don't have any other options, and that's why I wish I could start 5 of my running backs instead of having to play 3 wide receivers. But Bourne is interesting if Debo misses. My top tight end to pick up, who I alluded to earlier in consideration with do I go him or Goddard, is Irv Smith Jr. With Kyle Rudolph out, Irv Smith came back into the lineup healthy, and he produced a big game, catching 4 balls for 63 yards and a touchdown. He was the only receiver to catch a touchdown from Kirk Cousins this past week. This pickup is contingent, though, on Kyle Rudolph remaining sidelined. If Rudolph comes back, I'm obviously going to stick with Goddard. If he doesn't, I'm going to have a tough decision to make. But if Irv Smith is the only tight end in town for Kirk Cousins, I think he's a solid streaming option at the position, especially against the Bears this week, who are they have been a good defense for the most part this season, except for against the tight end. Against the tight end, they are like a top 3 matchup for fantasy tight ends. So if Kyle Rudolph is sidelined and I'm able to grab Irv Smith off the waiver wire, I'm going to have a tough choice between him or Dallas Goedert. Other tight ends you could consider: Logan Thomas is still available in over 40% of leagues, but monitor if Alex Smith is playing. If Alex Smith is out and Dwayne Haskins is starting, I would not start Logan Thomas at all under any circumstance. Dan Arnold for the Cardinals, he caught another touchdown from Kyler Murray this past week, which brings him up to 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. So there's that. It looks like he's becoming a legit red zone target. And Cole Kmet from the Bears, he outsnapped and out-targeted Jimmy Graham again this past week, but Graham was the one who scored the touchdown. So I wouldn't start Cole Kmet really, but he looks to be the leading tight end in Chicago. If anything, this just means that I wouldn't start Jimmy Graham either. And we will wrap up with some quarterback streamers. My favorite stream this week, who I talked about as a lower end streaming option last week, but I really liked his week 15 and 16 matchups, is Jared Goff. He gets the Jets this week, and he's my favorite streamer. If you grabbed him last week and held him on your bench, or he's probably still available on waivers if you didn't grab him last week, you can pick him up and play him against the Jets this week. It is a great matchup. He's just my backup. I did pick him up last week in case Lamar got hurt or missed or something. But he's just my backup right now. But if you've been streaming all year, I think Goff is a very good streamer for week 15 and someone that you can hold through week 16 too. Next up, I think Trubisky is actually a good streamer against Minnesota. Like I highlighted earlier, Trubisky has a good matchup this week and next week. Like I've talked about David Montgomery having a good playoff matchup, that carries through to Trubisky, who's been decent the last few weeks. I did pick up Trubisky last week because in my reality sports league, because my opponent had Nick Foles, who was out, and then he had Carson Wentz as one of his starting quarterbacks who got benched. So I was able to snag Trubisky before he could get to the waiver wire, and he was forced to start Mike Glennon. So that was great. So I do have Trubisky on my roster, but I am probably sticking with Kirk Cousins in the same matchup against the Bears and Ryan Tannehill over Trubisky. But he's a good option, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. And then Jalen Hurts gets to take on Arizona. I think the rushing base makes him a very interesting play. I wouldn't necessarily trust a rookie quarterback in his second start in the second round of your playoffs. But if you were desperate in 2 quarterback leagues, if, for instance, in my 12-team Superflex league, if Taysom Hill's not the starter and Matthew Stafford is out, if Hurts was available, which he is not available on waivers, I would pick him up and start him probably over Alex Smith. But like I said, only 2 quarterback leagues is he in consideration for me. And the rushing base just makes him a safer play than what you might think. With that, we will conclude the Tuesday episode. Be sure to check out the website for the Week 15 modeled rankings. Those will be available on Thursday. The website is thefantasyfootballactuary.com. Like I mentioned last week, I'm trying to refine those models. Obviously, in the offseason, I will be continuing to work on improving the model accuracy, but I think they're in a pretty good place last week. I did get Cam Akers as a low-end RB1 last week, and that panned out. So, yeah, it's hits like that make me feel like my model is getting pretty accurate. So you can check those rankings out on the website. I have non-PPR, half PPR, full point PPR, flex rankings, all for free on the website. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it is at the FF Actuary. And if you want to watch video versions of this podcast, this episode, or any future episodes, you can go to YouTube. The channel is The Fantasy Football Actuary. If you are watching on YouTube, I ask you to subscribe and like this podcast. It just helps the podcast grow and reach more people. So with that, enjoy the Thursday night football matchup. I will be back here on Saturday to help you prepare more for round 2. Until then, keep crunching those numbers.